Hello, good morning, dear learners, my dear students. This is Tutor Frida Zawede, part of the blended, uh, the part of the intercollaborative blended learning project. And today we are going to look at nursing and the law, as you can see. So in this illustration, you can see we have a weighing scale that shows something to us that we can probably start thinking about. We have a stethoscope, and then we have the hammer that is used in courts, of course. So when you look at this, you are able to see that as nurses, we need to have a balance between our practice and the law. But maybe someone may be asking themselves, why are we looking at the law? We are nurses, we are not lawyers. Of course, we are not lawyers, and certainly not at all. But we need to have knowledge of the law so that we cannot fall culprits at any given time. And in case such situations come, then we shall also know what to do or what steps to take. So in today's session, we have our learning objectives, and we should be able to define the law, explain the importance of laws to the nurse. This will give us a uh, we shall have an analysis about why we are really looking at the law. Outline the sources of the law. Then we have to explain the types of laws, identify selected legal aspects in nursing, some situations that actually affect us, and then we shall discuss the Nurses and the Midwives Act. So, by introduction, the nursing practice is governed by uh, a number of legal concepts, and therefore our knowledge of the law uh, that affects nursing practice is needed. Because why do we need to have knowledge, to have an understanding of the law? Because it's going to help us guide the practice that we shall be doing. It is going to guide our decisions and actions in the areas of work, and it will also protect us from any liabilities, any situations that make us break the law. So we shall be aware that in case I have gone contrary to what has been said, to what the country that I'm serving in has said, or what the body that regulates me has said, what punitive measures are against me, or what steps can I take that can protect me as a nurse. So this is why it is very important for us to have knowledge of the law. At one given time, some of you, my dear learners, you will be in leadership positions, and you'll be interfaced with different circumstances, different situations. But in cases of such situations, what are you going to do? What will you do as the in charge, as the area manager, as the boss in that capacity? So by definition, the law, uh, by definition, the law is a total sum of rules and regulations by which a society is governed. So we are just simply looking at rules and regulations. Though we are saying simply, it may not be simply, but if we can draw it back home, in our different institutions, that is in Masaka, in Kabale, in Lira, and in Mlago, we have rules and regulations that we have probably signed since we have just enrolled into these institutions. And why have you signed against those rules and regulations? It's because you have read and you have understood that in case of anything that may happen, I am liable or I am accountable for my actions. So these laws are created by people and they exist to regulate all persons. So that means that no one is above the law. So in case, for example, you fight with your colleague at school, what are the set rules and regulations saying? Are you supposed to fight? If not, what steps are going to be taken against you? So this is what we are looking at. So various people define the law, but when you try to uh, look through their different definitions, it comes back to one thing. Like for example, in the Uganda Catholic Medical Bureau, that is the procedure manual that we are certainly going to interface with so oftenly in this course. It defines a law as a system of rules a society sets and maintains in order to protect harm to persons and property. So still we are talking about rules, and the society sets and maintain. So that means that in the maintenance, we are regulating our decisions and actions. And therefore, in the society, we find people. So these people uh, enact these rules, and if they are enacted, then they are there to regulate us. And therefore, it means that we have to conform to these set rules and regulations. We have to abide in simple terms. But in this definition, you realize that they're talking about harm to persons and also property. So it's not only to people, but it also includes people's property. Then also we have another definition that says a law is a system of rules which a particular country or community recognizes as regulating the actions of its members and which it may enforce by the imposition of penalties. So in this definition, it reminds us that this system of rules is for a particular country. So for example, in Uganda, we have our set rules and regulations or our set laws. These laws may may sometimes be universal, like you find that there are laws that are set, but they may be similar to another country. However, there are some laws that may be different. So it is very important for us to know what that country sets as their rules and regulations. And then also, the beauty with this definition is that it also reminds us that this system of rules can be recognized in a community. And by definition, if we say a community is a group of people living within the same boundaries and share the same resources, share the same interests. So if we look at a community of nurses, we have a set of rules and regulations that govern us, that regulate us as nurses. So there is a body that regulates us as nurses. It regulates our actions. And therefore, if we are serving people, if we are serving patients, clients, we have to know that there is somewhere where we need to abide by the rules and regulations. And in case we do not meet these obligations, there are penalties. We have to be reminded of that, and that is stipulated by the law. Um, so now we are going to look at the importance of the laws to the nurse. How are laws important to the nurse? First, the law is going to protect the public from persons unqualified to practice. So if there is, sorry about that, if there is any person who is practicing out there and they have never been trained to be nurses and they are practicing as nurses, the law is there to act on them. Because the law stipulates that each person who is supposed to practice as a nurse must have gone through a certain training, and they must have had a period of training. Like, for example, we're having diploma nurses who train for 3 years. We're having certificate nurses who train for 2.5 years. So this individual must have gone through that period of training, and then they must have qualified. By qualifying, we mean that this person must have passed their examinations to meet the standards of the bodies that examine them. And then they say this is a diploma nurse, this is a certificate nurse. So if we've heard of people who practice without qualifications, that is wrong and that is against the law. Then too, the law defines the scope of the nurse. So what do we mean by the scope of the nurse? What you are expected to do. Like, for example, you are in the hospital and the patient comes in the emergency situation. And then you fold your hands and say, no, I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait for the doctor to come and review this patient. If this patient dies, unfortunately, what is going to happen? They are going to go and look at what is expected of you to do in an emergency situation. And what if it happens that you were supposed to do something as you wait for the doctor, then you're going to be accountable for that death. So the law reminds us of our roles and responsibilities during practice, where we are supposed to end. For example, there are people who are nurses, but they want to do surgeries because they have seen this being done, the doctors, and they have somehow learned this is wrong. That is beyond your scope. So it tells us where we are supposed to stop as a certificate nurse, as a diploma nurse. We have our end line, that I should not cross this line. Then 3, to protect patients from legal risks. Patients are most times interfaced by legal risks, but the knowledge of the law is going to help us to advocate for our patients, because as a nurse, you are going to learn this. You are supposed to be an advocate for your patients or for your clients. So if you don't know anything about the law, you're not going to help your clients or patients. But if you have knowledge of the law, you will help them, because sometimes patients are there, they are very sick, but their family members probably are selling their property, and this will not help the patient to recover very soon. Then it also deals with legal threats effectively. So most of the times we are interfaced with threats that are legal, but we don't know what to do. The law is there to tell you that in such and such circumstances, these are the steps and procedures that you have to take. It may be you as a nurse, it can be your colleague, it can be another health team member, but also it can be our clients. The law also helps us to remember that there is issuancy of licenses, because we have said they are regulatory bodies. That means if there is a regulatory body for the nurses, as we shall see, this body is supposed to issue licenses for practice, meaning that any qualified nurse must register with this body, and then they are given licenses. These licenses are given for a period of time, they expire, you have to keep renewing so that you are updated and the system knows that we have so and so as a nurse who is practicing. However, it also tells you in which situations that practicing license can be revoked or suspended. It can be taken away from you in cases of gross incompetency or negligence. They can revoke your license or they can suspend it completely. Yes, you studied, you qualified, but because of certain things that you did, and they did not meet the standards of practice, then you are no longer recognized as a nurse. Then lastly, the law assists in maintaining a standard of nursing practice by making nurses accountable under the law. So why do we have these rules and regulations? To make us accountable for our actions. That I did this by the virtue that I am qualified to do this. Was it wrong or was it right? So the law is there to make us accountable individuals. Whenever we don't be accountable, we shall not do things according to the standards. So there is a standard where we have to practice from. So those are the importances of laws to the nurse. All right, in our next objective, we have to look at the sources of the law. And under the sources of the law, we have these classical four. The first one is the constitutional law, and this forms the government. It establishes rights and duties. So in the constitutional law, we are basically looking at the laws that govern a given country. Okay, so the laws that govern Uganda. You know, in Uganda we have a constitution, and the constitution uh, outlines or stipulates the rules and regulations that govern us as Ugandans. So these laws govern a given state, okay, and they are there to govern us, the people. Then legislation, these are created by Congress or state legislatures. So if we say Congress, probably in Uganda, this is not a common word for us, but in our common word is the parliament. Okay, so these laws are passed in parliament. You've heard of bills being passed, you've had the MPs arguing about this and that, but in the parliament there are laws that are passed. Okay, and these laws, once passed, they are signed by the executive, and the executive, of course, for our country is the president. Like, for example, recently uh, there was a law that was passed whereby they allowed the UPDF, okay, to take civilians to courts of law of the army. Okay, so it gave them power to take civilians there. And after it was passed in parliament, then this was signed by the president of the country. And if the president signs, then it means that it is now a law that has to be followed for that given state. Then we have judicial decisions, or what we can call uh, common laws. Okay, so in these judicial decisions, these are court cases. They interpret legislation and create common laws. So for example, there are decisions that are made by judges in courts, and then they set them as laws. These happen during court proceedings. Then regulations, or we can call it the administrative law. So these are agencies that have been given powers and authority to govern a specified group of people. Like, for example, as the nurses, we have the Uganda Nurses and Midwives Council that regulates our practice. Okay, so those are the sources of the law, and in detail, we look at the constitutional law as a supreme law of the country, just as mentioned before. And this must be observed or I can say every person of that given country must conform to the constitutional law, because it defines the basic principles that have to be followed by an individual. So I hope we are together, my dear learners, and in case of any questions, if something is not clear, please write it down, write that question down, and when we meet, we can always uh, interact and discuss together. Okay, then we have the legislation or the statutory law. These are enacted by any legislative body and they are called statutory laws. They are written and passed by the legislature on the state or federal level. So, who is a legislature? This is an officially elected, otherwise selected body of people vested with the responsibility and power to make laws for a political unit, such as a state or a unit. So here we have talked about small bodies. So usually in legislature or statutory law, we see uh, here, for example, in Uganda, parliament where it passes the laws. Okay, so the parliament was given power to do so, and therefore it sets statutory laws. Okay, to regulate us, the citizens of the state. Okay, then we have the administrative law. So it says the administrative law, when a legislature passes a statute, the administration is given authority to create rules and regulations to enforce the statutory laws. So if the law was passed, for example, in parliament, this is going to give powers to the regulatory bodies. Like for example, our Nurses and Midwives Council. They will pass a bill in the parliament, and if it is concerning nursing practice, then the Nurses Council is going to create rules and regulations to enforce these laws. And then the common law, we looked at it as laws evolving from court decisions, okay? And they are developed by judges through court decisions and then they become laws. So those are the sources of laws. Now we are going to look at the types of laws. So the types of laws, we have the public law, as we can see. And this public law refers to the body of laws that deals with the relationship between individuals and the government or the governmental agencies. So this is an important segment of public law because it stipulates the criminal law, deals with safety and welfare of the public. So in case the public law is broken, then that becomes criminal. So what do we mean by the public law is that we are looking at people who, what is the public? The public are people of that given country. So why are we saying we're looking at individual relationships and the government agencies or the government? So if you break the public law, for example, in cases of theft, it is you, an individual, against the government. Like in most cases we've had of nurses or health workers who have stolen medicines from the hospital, they have stolen equipment from the hospital. So if they are prosecuted in the courts of law, so it will be that individual against the government because they have broken the law of they have broken a law between themselves and the government. Okay, manslaughter, murder, and homicides. Okay, killing of people, that is between that individual and the government, because it basically or it mainly looks at safety and welfare of the people or the public. So we have the private or the civil law as the second type of law. And in this, it is a body of law that deals relationships with among private individuals. So what do we mean by private individuals? It can be between me and you, my student. Okay, right? But if it is you and your school, like Mulago, like Lira, like Masaka, like Kavare, then it is you against that governmental agencies, because we all know that these institutions of ours are government institutions. So in the civil law, we classify it into two. We have the contract law and then the tort law. So what do we mean by a contract law? It is the enforcement of agreements among private individuals. So we've had situations where by people come together, agree on terms and conditions, and then they sign contracts. Like, for example, the common one, it is money. You come, I want to borrow money from you. Okay, with how much? Maybe 3 million. Okay, how are you going to pay me? I'm going to pay you at the end of 6 months, for example, and I'll pay wholesomely. Okay, so let us make an agreement. So you write down, you agree, and sign. So that becomes a contract law. So in case things go wrong, by the end of 6 months, you're not paying me my money, I go and sue you. And I'll use this contract as evidence that you took my money and you agreed to pay me in that period of time. So that is the contract law as a classification under the civil or private law. Then the tort law. The tort law defines and enforces duties and rights among private individuals that are not based on contractual agreement. You just agree and you decide, you make decisions by yourselves, and after that is it. There is no written document. There is no witness to say that, yeah, so and so did this and this. Okay. So in such cases, we define that as a tort law. And examples of this, we have invasion of privacy, okay, assault. There is nowhere a thief is going to come to take away your phone, for example, and they make a contract with you. They are going to beat you up and then they take your property. Abandonment. We have seen in different hospital settings where patients are abandoned. They could be elderly or very young children, and then the hospitals get stranded with these patients. No relative. Sometimes they don't know who they are. Sometimes they are very unconscious and they don't even have a name. Police just comes and puts the patients there and then goes. Okay, so another example of the tort is negligency and then malpractice. These actions happen so oftenly within our hospital settings, whereby we look at, we see people neglecting their duties. Patient comes, someone just keeps on attending to other things. Maybe you are on WhatsApp, eh? And you don't provide the care that you're supposed to provide. That is being negligent for your duties. Okay, so negligency and malpractice, usually these are unintentional. So in malpractice, what the examples that we can have are medication errors. Like, for example, you've given an overdose to the patient, but it wasn't your intention to cause harm. Okay, but we're going to look at this in more detail. So we have our next objective was looking at the selected legal aspects of nursing practice. So here we are going to look at a few situations where the laws come in. For example, informed consent, delegation, violence, abuse and neglect, controlled substances, in cases of abortions, deaths, and any other related issues, and then sexual harassment. So these are common ones, but we're going to look at one by one at a time. So informed consent. In informed consent, we are looking at an agreement by a client to accept a course of treatment or a procedure after being provided complete information. So this is very important. For example, you are coming to give me uh, a medication, you're giving me Panadol. Yes, it is going to help me. But as a nurse, as a healthcare professional, you have to come and explain to me that, madam, according to your condition, we need to give you this kind of treatment, which is Panadol. And therefore, we request that you accept this treatment because it's going to help relieve that pain you are having. And then I accept. Okay? So that is informed consent, because you tell me the benefits of this treatment or the benefits of this procedure, and then also you tell me of the risks. If I don't receive this treatment, my pain is not going to go away. Okay, but also the minor side effects that you may get, like for example, maybe you can have nausea, okay, because this is a medication, so that I consent when I have full information. Like for example, you're going to take me to theater to open me up. What are the risks there? Okay, what if I don't come back? What if I come back? So I have to go in when I know the benefits and the risks of that treatment and any alternative to the treatment. If we don't do this surgery, we can do this. However, this surgery is very important to help in the progress of the condition. Okay, and if you have not accepted for this procedure or this treatment, your prognosis, if you're not treated, this may happen. So that I consent when I have all this information. So that is informed consent. And after me uh, understanding what you are meaning. So obtaining informed consent is a responsibility of the person performing the procedure. This is very important. The person who is going to perform the procedures. Now that there are certain procedures that we cannot do as nurses. Okay, so if it is surgery, the doctor has to come and explain to the patient. But most of the times, you find that the doctor will tell the nurse, this patient requires this kind of surgery. Prepare the patient. You do the consent, you prepare the patient, and then the patient goes to theater. But then, this is not right. Okay, you as a nurse, you're supposed to be a witness. The doctor has to come explain to the patient, in this surgery we're going to do this and this and that. This may happen, this may not happen, and then I understand. Then if the patient understands, the doctor tells the patient to sign, and you as a nurse, you are there as a witness to verify that the patient has understood, has provided their own signature, they are of sound mind, and no one has forced them or coerced them to do that. But remember, there are also procedures that we do as nurses. Okay, so if that procedure can be done by you, then you have to obtain consent from the patient. Delegation. In delegation, what are we looking at? Here we are looking at transferring a competent individual the authority to perform a selected nursing task in a selected situation. So why are we saying this? That this can become a legal threat or aspect. That most of the times people delegate to delegate to others responsibilities when they are not competent. For example, you have a degree nurse, they are going to delegate you the certificate nurse. But did you have the same competence to do that tasks? Okay, so in delegation, someone should transfer authority or responsibility to a competent person. So usually it is to the person of the same level, okay? And the person who is above you, who has that exact competence. As you can see down there, if you're delegating to your colleague a task, explain. So I make sure that this person is able to do exactly as you are going to do that task, so that you don't get issues. Because if it happens that this person does something wrong, oops, perhaps there can be problems, and therefore they will come for you. Who delegated? Whom did you delegate to? Which qualifications do they have? Things of that sort. Like for example, students, and then the staff delegates you, gives you roles, or leaves the shift for you. That is wrong. You don't have the same level of competency. Violence, abuse, and neglect. Violent behavior can include domestic violence, child abuse, elder abuse, or sexual abuse. We have seen this sometimes in certain settings where patients have beaten up health workers, okay, or health workers have beaten up patients. This is against the law, and this can bring about legal issues. So, domestic violence, sometimes it is colleagues. uh, the doctor fights with the nurse or the cleaner, certain such things that are not nice. Those bring about legal issues, and this is against the law. Sexual abuse. Some nurses have been raped. Some health workers have raped patients. So you have to be aware that such actions are against the law, and they can bring about legal issues. Neglect is absence of care necessary to maintain the health or safety of a vulnerable individual, such as a child or an elder. You neglect someone, you neglect a child. We've had cases where people are saying, my baby was neglected in the neonatal intensive care unit, and the baby died. That is very hurting. You, as a healthcare professional, as a nurse, you must do your duties very well. We've heard of mothers in labor who have claimed that they have been neglected. Some of them have ended up dying, others have lost their babies. So these vulnerable individuals don't need to be neglected. And in case you neglect them, the law is there and you'll be prosecuted. You'll be sued. So sometimes, and there is use of wrong or improper words that hurt and injure someone. Abuse maybe physical, or it can be verbal. So you can be sued for the words that you say. So we have to be very careful. So in cases of controlled drugs mainly include stimulants, depressants, narcotics, or hallucinogens. Ooh. So these have been abused in most cases. In most cases, because nurses have access to these drugs, the narcotics, you give them, you are the one to administer. I'll share with you an example. There was a certain nurse where I was working. He was addicted to pethidine, which is a narcotic drug. So he was working on a surgical unit, and on this unit, patients would be coming back from theater operating rooms, and they are given the strong painkillers in the first initial hours. So what he could do, he would get water for injection. He goes to the narcotic cupboard, gets the drugs, and signs there for this patient, and it's right according to the prescription. So what he does, he gets the drug, pockets it, and then give patients water for injection. That was really wrong. That was misuse of drugs. So he would abuse the pethidine, and this can result into criminal penalties. So if you're found guilty, you will be sued. So these drugs are not supposed to be abused. And this nurse, of course, they caught him and he lost his job. He lost his job. Then in cases of abortions, we have to remember what are the religious teachings. Okay? To the Muslims, the Quran clearly disapproves killing of other humans. Take not life which Allah has made sacred. So we've heard of cases where healthcare professionals perform abortions. Why are we emphasizing abortions? Because according to different countries, they have rules and regulations. And when it comes to abortions, our country, Uganda, does not allow committing of abortions, criminal abortions. There are situations where these are done for medical or therapeutic reasons, but for criminal cases, you are going to be sued. And when it comes to the Bible, in Exodus 20:13, it says that you shall not murder. So for the Christians, the Bible says you should not kill. The verse urges that abortion is taking of human life and therefore violates that commandment. However, in situations where there is need to save life of the woman, preserve physical health and mental health, abortions can be legally allowed. So what is the take-home message for us is that we have to know the laws of a given country. The laws here in Uganda do not approve of abortion, but there are situations where abortions can be legal. Okay, and we're saying that is in most cases for therapeutic reasons. And the therapeutic reasons we are saying physical health, mental health of the mother. But for any other reasons that I got pregnant, I'm still in school, you're not supposed to end that human life. Sometimes nurses participate. You have not actually done the actual abortion, but you aid in the abortion. Please, you must tell those people, the doctors who perform these abortions, that according to the set rules and regulations of your body, that is the Nurses Council, you are not allowed to do that. If it means to lose your job, it is okay. You wash your hands clean than you getting that money. People are making money out of this, but what does the law say? And then what does your religion say about this? So that will keep haunting you in your mind. Then death and related issues. So nurses' roles in legal issues related to death is prescribed by the laws of the region and policies of the health care institutions. So in cases of death, there are procedures or there is a process that is usually followed. But what we should know is deaths and attitudes about sorry, deaths and attitudes about death also vary among cultures. So there are some cultural principles that surround death. And then we should also be reminded that we should practice in a culturally sensitive environment. If it is culture, you may have to respect that in terms of death. But then when we talk about related issues like a person has died, this person has been wealthy, who is the next of kin? Because this is a very important person. So you as healthcare workers, you as nurses, you're going to help the family in uh, sorting out the issues that come along in death. Sometimes patients tell you things and they are on their deathbed. You are just a nurse. The family members are not around, or they've abandoned this patient. Like what procedures can you take? Then also, we have to know about the current trends. Here in Uganda, it's not yet a law that has been passed, but some patients may really suffer a lot and they may ask you, that, please, Msao, can you give me some medication that can take my life so that I get relieved of this suffering? So what do you do? Okay, the law is there. All right, so that's why we are talking about death and related issues. So the law is there and the proceedings that you have to take, and therefore, you knowing that in such situations, you should not take it lightly. The patient has said they are suffering. Let me help them have a peaceful death. No, my dear, you need to take precautions. Then sexual harassment is defined as the unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature. So most of the times, as you see in that illustration, we're having a nurse having hands touching. You've had cases where the nurse is providing treatment to the patient and the patient is touching their buttocks. That is not proper. That is sexual harassment. And the law is there to defend you in such situations or in such circumstances. Sometimes it's not the patient, but your fellow colleagues. Another healthcare team member. We've heard of cases where doctors have raped nurses or nurses have raped patients. These are funny things, but you can be sued for such an action. All right, so those are some of the aspects or the situations where legal issues can come into play, and these are highlighters for us that in such situations we can be sued, and therefore we have to be knowledgeable of the law. So your requirement is to go and read. If I am sexually harassed, what can I do? Or what does the law say? Just know you have a right in such situations to defend yourself or to get justice. The law is there. All right, so moving on to our next objectives. We have potential liabilities in nursing. Like we have seen on some of the selected legal aspects, there are liabilities that happen, and here we are going to emphasize more about the tort law. And nursing liability is usually involved with tort law. So it is important for a nurse to know the differences between malpractice, that is unintentional torts, and intentional torts. So here we are going to look at what are these intentional torts and what are these non-intentional torts. So in the malpractice, like we said, torts, these individual sorry about that, go back. Next objective, we are going to look at areas of potential liabilities in nursing. But let us first know what a liability is. A liability is simply a situation that makes you legally responsible. Like, for example, something that makes you legally responsible, maybe a patient claims that you have you have mistreated them or you have neglected them, that can make you legally responsible. So nursing liability is usually involved with tort law, and it is important for a nurse to know the differences between crimes and torts. So like previously seen, we looked at torts as differences between individuals. Okay, so we are going to look at crimes and torts in detail. So here, a crime is an act committed in violation of the public or criminal law, and this is punishable by a fine or imprisonment. So we've been talking about uh, situations where we may fall victims or where we may uh, be prosecuted by the law. So when you commit a crime, you have violated the public law, which we looked at previously, or what we call the criminal law. And therefore, you are charged. Remember, we're looking at an individual versus the government. And when you are charged, they can charge you for a fine or imprisonment. But this can also be both. You can either have a fine or you can be imprisoned too. So crimes are punishable through criminal action by the state against an individual, just like I've explained before. So it may be in terms of imprisonment or a fine. However, these crimes are classified into a felony or a misdemeanor. So in a felony, these are crimes of a serious nature, such as murder, armed robbery, second-degree murder, and the punishment is to serve a term in prison. If you commit murder, you will have definitely to be imprisoned, and probably you may pay or have a fine, and that is uh, to pay for the damages that are caused. However, a misdemeanor is of a less serious, of it is just an offense of less seriousness in nature and is usually punishable by a fine or short term in jail sentence or both. So sometimes we've had people commit unserious crimes, that is a misdemeanor, and they may sentence them to community service, that you'll have to go and sweep this road for a period of this time, things of that sort. But also they may give you 1 month, 2 months in prison, or do both punishments depending on what you have done. So here we have an example. Like for example, if you are a nurse who has been introduced to professional nursing and ethics, you slap a client's face. So the client may charge you for a misdemeanor. Like certain situations may provoke you to really go out of your emotions. However, we are supposed to control our emotions. But if it happens, if it is not a grave offense, you will be charged with a simple sentence in jail, or they may give you a fine. Fine says you have slapped me and therefore I need this money in my jaw. I put in money for treatment or things of that sort. So that is the difference between the two classifications of crimes. And then when we talk about a tort, uh, as previously discussed, it is a civil wrong committed against a person or person's property. So it may not be only to individuals, but also their property. And these are usually litigated in court by civil action between individuals. So sometimes we've heard of situations where people go to court and then they negotiate and the matter is resolved. So those are cases of torts. However, this can be classified into quasi intentional or malpractice and negligence, what we call unintentional. And the commonest one in our nursing practice is the malpractice and negligence. However, we should know we have some examples that follow under intentional torts, like for example, fraud. Fraud in nursing practice, examples that we can use, we can, like for example, you don't tell the patient the truth, you hide. In instances where by we've had situations where people go for HIV tests and one individual goes back door and orients the nurse or the healthcare worker and tells them In case my results turn out positive, please say that I am negative. So that is fraud. Okay. So that is intentional. You intentionally do it knowing that this patient is positive, but I'm giving them a negative result. Also, invasion of privacy. This this happens in our nursing practice. We are supposed to provide patients privacy. This privacy may be during procedures, but also to their information. You don't disclose information just anyhowly. So the that is intentional. Like for example, patient so and so, you know them, probably this is a reverend, but then they come, they are HIV positive, and probably the wife doesn't know, and you disclose such information. Okay, so that can be a case against you between that individual because you intentionally invade their privacy. So in cases of assault, of course, you're going to beat someone intentionally. It cannot be unintentional. Battery, you beat up someone, or false imprisonment. False imprisonment can happen when you detain a patient by force, and usually this is common in mental health. We have heard of situations where people are brought in because they are legal threats in the family, what, and they bring them to mental institutions when they're actually not mentally sick, but you detain them and make them mentally sick patients. So those are intentional thoughts. So when we look at the quasi-intentional, these include defamation. An example of defamation, or what we mean by defamation, this is commonly done in our societies, where someone spreads false information about you, and this can bring about uh, hatred, and then you be avoided by people. Like for example, someone may spread rumors against you and they are actually very wrong. So that is defamation. They will spoil your name and you will actually be isolated from others. So there is also slander. Slander is different from defamation. How? Because in slander, these statements are made orally. Okay, so someone just speaks about you, but the difference with defamation is that uh, the difference between slander and libel is that in slander it is oral, uh, false communication, because this is still under defamation, and libel, someone makes false writing against you. The false communication is in writing and they spread it. So those are statements made in writing and they are false. So that is quasi intentional. So you realize that these are really done when someone is aware of what they are doing. And when you look at defamation, this communication is actually harmful. It can spoil your name and it will hurt the person that you are spreading false information about. So then, still, another category of a tort is negligence. And we say this is commonly in our nursing practice, which is the failure to use ordinary or reasonable care as dictated by standards of practice. So, the standards of practice, these can be according to health facility settings, it can be according to the regulatory bodies, and if, for example, you do not meet that care to that patient, yet you're supposed to do that, then you are being negligent. However, negligence is not intentional. Okay, so intent is not an element of negligence, and we have different examples under negligence. Like for example, you may forget, or maybe you had heavy workload and a patient does not receive their treatment. Yes, you are negligent, but it was not your intention to do that. Then malpractice. Malpractice is a professional form of negligence. So it is under uh, what we call unintentional torts, but the difference between the malpractice and negligence is that in malpractice there is usually an intention, and still malpractice is done by a professional. In negligence, any person who is not a professional, who is not a nurse, but they are within the healthcare settings, they can do this. They can be negligent. But malpractice, it is done by a professional. So that's why we are saying it's a professional form of negligence which results in harm or injury. Like, for example, medication errors. You give a patient an overdose, or you give them repeated doses. This can result into injury. Or you fail to monitor patients. Supposed to continuously monitor the patient, the condition deteriorates and the patient dies. That is injury already caused to an individual. Documentation errors. For example, you have made a test, or maybe you were very tired and then you document faulty results. Failure to provide treatment. Some nurses go to an extent of um, actually documenting that they have given treatment, but in the actual sense, the patient has not received the treatment. Other instances could be birth injuries. For example, you have used the instruments wrongly during delivery of the baby, and the baby gets a fracture, gets a bruise, things of that sort. So that is being negligent. You have not met the standards. And these standards that we are talking about could be according to your job description as a nurse, diploma nurse, or certificate nurse. What duties are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to carry out? Then it could be also according to hospital policies, that in this hospital there are procedures and policies that we follow, that if we get a patient of this nature, we do this and this, and then you don't do it, then you are practicing malpractice. And this can be turned out to be crimes when there is injury, or when the patient claims and has evidence of you not providing treatment. So you can be sued for this. So those are the different categories of torts that we do have. So you can read more about it, get more examples, and probably you can get more clear information when you read Fundamentals of Nursing by Bapa Vampathar, so that you are able to really have a clear distinction between the two. So now, about the laws, we still have the Good Samaritan law, and this is referring to someone who renders aid in an emergency to an injured person on a voluntary basis. I know some of us have done voluntary work before. So there is a law that protects you. It provides legal protection to people who provide assistance to those injured or ill or incapacitated. Most of the times you may be moving on the road and then you find someone is injured, and then you may be hesitant to help this person because probably the police will question you a lot. But we have a law that is there to protect you, and which is the Good Samaritan law. So this law encourages health workers or bystanders to provide assistance to people in need without fear of being sued or being persecuted for unintentional injury or wrongful death. So this law does not cover activities during performance of regular duties and if a health worker acted out of the scope of practice. So what does this mean? It is very important for us to note that uh, you as a nurse, you are supposed to help people in cases of emergencies and provide the necessary care. However, it will not cover you during performance of regular duties. What do we mean? it won't cover you when you are doing activities that you're expected to do. Okay, so if I'm a nurse and the patient is bleeding, I'm supposed to arrest hemorrhage, I'm supposed to do this and that. And if you don't do that, then the law will not cover you. Oh, if you go out of the scope, you are a nurse and then you start, for example, a patient has gotten a fracture and then you take them to the operating room and then you start manipulating the fracture. So however much we have the Good Samaritan law, we should act within our scope of practice. And lastly, we have the Nurses and Midwives Act as captured in the Article 274. So as we started looking at the law, we talked about regulatory bodies, what regulates us. So here we are looking at the Nurses and Midwives Council. And when we talk about the Nurses and Midwives Council, we are looking at regulation of our practice. So this law was established by the Nurses and Midwives Council, which regulates nurses and midwifery practice in Uganda. So every nurse, every midwife is regulated by the Nurses and Midwives Council. So this act requires nurses and midwives to register. So when you qualify, you finish your last semester, you do your end of semester exams, you pass, and the results are back. We have the examining body, which is Uganda Health Professionals Examination Body. So this is mandated to assess you, to give you examinations. And when you meet their standards, you pass the exams, they release your results. So these results are also sent to the Nurses and Midwives Council. So once they reach the Nurses and Midwives Council, they will call you to go for registration. So you have to register by this body. Failure to do that, you are not allowed to practice. So you go register, you go through a set of an interview. Nowadays it has changed, it is done online for the diplomas and certificates. After passing that online exam, then you have to go to the council. But back then, in our times, you would go for registration at the Nurses Council. You are subjected to an oral interview, and when you pass it, then they register you in the book. You will be there for the rest of your life. Okay? So when you're registered as an enrolled nurse or as a registered or as a diploma nurse or midwife, they will issue a license. And this license allows you to practice in Uganda. So for any job that you are given, this is the license that you have to present. And this license is recognized. However, sometimes some people go abroad to work from abroad. So, like for example, in the United Kingdom, they also have a Nurses and Midwives Council. So, if you're going to work there, the Nurses and Midwives Council in UK will work with the Nurses and Midwives Council in Uganda to verify that you're truly a registered nurse in Uganda. And then according to their set rules and regulations, probably you'll have to do certain things, however much you're registered in your country. So everybody, remember we said, under the administrative law is given powers and authority. So if there are requirements that you are supposed to meet, then according to that state, you'll have to do it. Like also nurses that go to America, Canada, things of that sort. So they register you, they give you your license, and then also we talked about the authority that they have to revoke or suspend your license. So this act also provides for enrollment and disciplinary measures for errant nurses and midwives of all categories. So that's why I'm saying that we have to remember that the Nurses Council has the mandate to revoke or suspend your license in cases of gross uh, disciplinary measures. So it is supposed to discipline us. That's why you'll find people being referred, like, for example, you don't meet the standards and your skills and knowledge are lacking. Go back for 6 months, practice in this hospital. After, you'll come back for registration. Or if you have been reported that maybe this nurse is doing this and that, you will be subjected to the disciplinary committee of the Nurses and Midwives Council. And then you receive your penalties. So that is the act, and that is our body that was given mandate to regulate us. So these are our references. I've also given you another reference where you can go and read for more details about the law. And in case of anything, please don't hesitate to contact me and we shall discuss. Thank you very much for listening.